What is going on, everyone? Tim from Tierfon Orbital. So, another Rey Scavenger from KR Sabers that has been installed with a phenomenal Metal Master or Master class chassis from Goth3D. Every time, I've mentioned this recently on social media, every time I get the opportunity and pleasure to do an install with a Goth chassis, I really, really appreciate. You get to appreciate the amount of design and detail that Rick from Goth3D puts into these chassis. There's no way I could compare myself to Rick and Goth3D as far as chassis design is concerned. But, designing my own chassis, I can really, really start to appreciate how much intricate work goes into, designing all of the moving parts for these chassis. It's a huge undertaking. So I really love being able to appreciate that about Goth's chassis. I hope to get to that caliber someday, or to where I'm designing, metal chassis. But as it stands now, Rick is the gold standard, in my opinion, as far as metal components go and metal chassis. So, yeah, really huge fan. I love the chassis. So, with the Goth3D chassis, they are very, very time consuming, right? So especially if you want to weather the metal, so you've got to make sure you're weathering all of your parts ahead of time. Rick does do a great job of guide videos on how to assemble and install. They are in time lapse, so it's I find myself pausing a lot during his videos, but. Which is great. At least there are videos, right? That's a great service that he has offered. So you've got to make sure that all your parts are weathered ahead of time. A lot of the specs call for very, very specifically cut threaded rods and tubes and like copper and brass rods. So you've got to make sure that everything is cut perfectly to his specifications. Otherwise, everything will not fit together properly. So that's part of the reason why these chassis are so time consuming to install. They're not difficult. It's just you've got to have a lot of patience. I actually, people do not believe me when I say this, but I did a Metal Master Graflex chassis from Goth. This was the second install I ever did. It was a case of, I really want to learn everything about this hobby, so I'm going to take the most difficult install, and I'm going to start with that, so everything subsequently after that will be easy. That was a huge mistake. I should not have done that. This was a CFX build as well. Beautiful chassis. It did work for some time. However, now it is not in working order. The OLED's broken. It was just not a very clean install because it was one of my early ones. But I love this chassis. I hope to someday do a Proffie install on one of these for my personal Graflex. But as it stands now, it is just a display piece. It will turn on, but yeah, it's a little worse for wear. And I was saying, you've got to make sure that all your rods and your threaded rods are exact. Otherwise, everything doesn't fit together properly. So this, it's like 2 millimeters too long. And then, so it doesn't fit in the Graflex very securely. It doesn't fit as snugly as I would like it to, right? So it just remains a display piece underneath my A New Hope Graflex there. But yeah, so huge fan of Goth's stuff. So without further ado, let's talk about the chassis really quick. We'll do an up close. We'll do a demo on how to use the blade and the hilt, and then we'll be on our way, right? So let's come up top. Let's go over the chassis first, right? So here's the chassis. Client wanted this weathered. So when I do weathering on the Goth chassis, I like to keep things a little two-toned, right? So a lot of the outer brass parts have been brass black, but the inner, like this inner chamber here, is still polished brass. The plasma gate around the crystal is still polished brass, and the mount where the crystal sits is polished brass, right? I just like to do that little two-tone action. Rick does suggest using like a sterling silver chemical treatment that you can put onto brass to make it look a little bit silver. I have yet to find that here in the States. It's hard to get a hold of, but I'd love to try that someday, right? So very simple, 28 millimeter speaker. This is from Smuggler's Outpost. We've got a kill switch here. Battery tray is here. I've already got my battery in. There's a beautiful board cover here that's magnet. It's a magnet. It's held in place with magnets. I do put Captain tape on top of the board anytime there is a metal piece above it, just to be safe. The board is far below that metal piece, but just to be safe, I like to do that, right? And that's it. We've got a spinning plasma gate around the upper crystal. Inside here, I'm not sure what you would call this area, secondary crystal chamber maybe. Underneath this, just above the battery, I've got a Neopixel ring from Kims Cantina that it's its own separate blade and has its own separate animations. Crystal's got its own separate animations as well. We've got an onboard tactile switch and a 6-rail PCB from Stock Custom Works. So, excuse me, let's talk about how to use this guy. So once you get your battery in, battery is negative orientation towards the speaker, okay? Hit your kill switch.
That lightsaber, it belongs to me.
Okay, so while it's out of the hilt, let's get a look at the spinning plasma gate around that crystal, and there's that animated ring underneath, just above the battery, right? So, to use the hilt, I already have the pommel loosened, but there are two flathead screws around each end of the pommel. So you want to twist, remove the pommel. There is a very thin O-ring down here. I always like to say this O-ring is very important. It helps to secure the pommel in place correctly. So try not to lose that. That's just one of the caveats about this hilt. Not only that, but the screws in the emitter. Don't get me started on those screws, right? So you take your pommel off. This is how I do it. So there are two notches on the upper part of that chassis. Line those up with those two flathead screws and just slide your chassis in until it stops, okay? Then you want to take your pommel and it just twist locks in place. Okay, I'm not going to tighten those set screws right now, just for the video, but there we go. So, you can see that crystal chamber through the grip. Here is something that I actually picked one of these up a while back. So the first time I did an install on one of these for a client, I fell in love with the hilt. I'm not going to get in too deep on the sequel trilogy, but I will say I love the design of Rey's saber. I think it's a phenomenally designed and uniquely designed hilt. So I had to pick one up for myself after I did an install. I recently got the steel emitters from KR Sabers. They offered these as an option a while back, so I got these, put those on. But in mine, I did a burlap and chantilly wrap, but I cut out windows. So what I would like to do is get a Goth chassis for my personal one, and that way you can see that spinning crystal chamber through the grip. I know this is not film accurate, guys. I know it looks weird, but to me, what is the point of having a beautiful chassis like that you can't see when the grip is on, right? So that's my reasoning behind that, right? So anyhow, so this is a single button setup. The switch assembly for this spinning ring is another difficult part of this install. So to activate, you want to unscrew and just all the way till it stops and release. You don't want to hold it down. So let's put a blade in it, okay? So with this particular hilt, you want to slide your blade all of the way down until it stops. Now, around the circumference of this emitter, there are 6 screws that serve as your blade retention. I'm only going to screw 2 in for now. But yeah, to secure the blade, you want to do all of those, right? Love it. I love this hilt. You know, I say that about all my hilts. Or all hilts. So I put the majority of Rey fonts on here for the client. Twist to activate, twist to deactivate is on. Long press of the main to go through your fonts.
That lightsaber was Luke's.
Great feeling hilt. Unique. Denis Lukyanov. I always don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Denis Lukyanov was a part of the design for this hilt. I love all of the hilts that he designs, right? So that's it. A quick rundown on a Goth chassis installed Rey Scavenger from KR Sabers. Again, I love doing the Goth chassis. Again, they're a little bit time consuming and intricate, but I love that about them. If you get all of your prep work done ahead of time and follow the instructions and have everything, it's almost like surgery. Like when I do a Goth chassis, I have all of the parts laid out on the table. So I'm organized, take it step by step. And each one that I do gets a little bit, not easier, but like more streamlined, right? So anyhow, if anyone has any questions about this install or the hilt, please don't be a stranger. For the client, thank you very much for trusting me with your install. And to the viewers, thank you for watching. Have a good one, everybody. May the force be with you. Later.